I watched a documentary called Chasing Train about John Coltrane, and it was very good. The spiritual aspect of what he did, his hardworking nature, his trips to Japan, his struggle with substance abuse. These are all things that are interesting. I also watched a documentary called Bill Evans, Time Remembered, which was, they had a crossover, the two of them. They were two very different people. So I watched two separate documentaries. One was for John Coltrane and one was for Bill Evans, but they were both jazz documentaries I watched on TOTB. There was lots of interviews with people close to the artists, and it was very interesting watching that. I also watched one on Charles Mingus. Charles Mingus was another colossal member of the jazz world, and just learning about all these guys, it's interesting to hear that they, where they came from and what that music represents. And in many ways, it seems like it's kind of a personal journey of these guys. That's what we're looking at, is their personal exploration of music. So the documentary I watched with was called Chasing Train, and then the documentary I watched was called Bill Evans Remembered, and then the Charles Mingus documentary was called Charles Mingus, Triumph of the Underdog. And so they're all just inspiring in terms of their dedication to their instrument. John Coltrane as sort of a spiritual force was interesting. Charles Mingus as a singular musical force was interesting in terms of the compositions he made. And then Bill Evans was also interesting just as a contributor to the music of the 20th century. And he recorded on Kind of Blue with Miles Davis and John Coltrane. So there was a combination. There was a meeting there between those two. And I think that looking at these guys, in many ways, jazz, it's kind of hard to decode what it is. The modal jazz that they looked at in Kind of Blue is interesting because you're staying kind of in one chord, one scale, one mode. And what Miles Davis was able to do with Bill Evans and John Coltrane at his disposal was amazing. And then Charles Mingus, I watched a documentary before, and it was called, I can't remember what it was, but it was one that was made during a rough period. So he had his initial period, then he kind of had tough times, and where he shot a hole in the ceiling. And then the documentary shoots a hole in the ceiling and gets evicted, and the police are there. But then he kind of came back and had this renaissance. All of them seem to have died early from their tough living. I'm trying to think of how Charles Mingus died. I know that John Coltrane, there was a lot of drinking and drugs, and same with Bill Evans, a lot of drugs anyhow. But these were great documentaries. I recommend them.